All right, cool. So it looks like it's just going to be us in person here. So we'll go ahead and kind of jump into it. So I've got we're working on our egg drop challenge, of course. You guys were here last week, right? Where we drew some eggs. And this week, we're going to draw the thing that holds our eggs here. This is kind of my initial thought of a thing that'll hold an egg. And then, we'll roll from there, but at least it'll be fun to draw something. So let's go ahead and open a new document. So my vision for this is we will put our eggs in their enclosures inside of this tube, and then we'll have maybe some springs or something that kind of keep it fixed in position and allow it to like bounce around when it hits the ground. Or maybe like fill this tube with water. That was a thought I had too. You can fill the tube with water, and then maybe when when it hits the ground, the water kind of gets out of the way slowly. Maybe. I mean, I'm not a physicist. I just draw things. So the key here is maybe keeping it oriented correctly. So that's what these little grid fins are doing. And I've always wanted to draw a grid fin in this class, so this is just a good excuse to draw some grid fins. And that's kind of what we're going to start with. So we'll start by modeling our grid fin, and then we'll make our little tube here, and I'll show you how to get a Mcmaster Car component involved in the mix. Mcmaster Car components are great for things like springs, and you can add them right into your file in this insert menu, which is a wonderful tool to have in your arsenal. So, without further ado, I'm going to start a brand new document here, and we can get started. So, I'm going to start our new document by making a new component. So, we're going to draw a series of grid fins, and each grid fin is going to be its own component, and that'll allow us to make a pattern of it really easily. This class is going to be all about patterns, so we're going to use the pattern tool in a lot of different ways. So I'm going to start by clicking on Create, and then come down to this New Component option and choose New Component. Now in my New Component window, I'm going to name this right away. So I'm going to give it a name of Grid Fin, because that's what we are going to be drawing inside of this component, or modeling inside of this component here. So I got my component named, and I'm going to go ahead and click Enter here. And now I've got my grid fin component that you can see inside of my main document component. And I can spin that open, and you can see that I don't have anything in it right now. But that's because I'm going to currently start making a sketch inside of said component. So I'll go ahead and click on Create, and then Create Sketch. And then I'm going to choose to draw on the top here, because it's kind of a top-down kind of approach to drawing this grid fin. That was my strategy when I kind of was practicing before class here. And I'm going to start by making the outline of where my grid fin is going to be. So let's come up and grab our rectangle tool here. So I'll come up and to Create, and then Rectangle, and then I'm going to come over to 2-point rectangle here. And I'm going to place the beginning of my 2-point rectangle right at my origin here. You guys know I like to always have something connected to my origin. I'll leave some creative freedom here as far as the size of our grid fin, but keep in mind this is half of our grid fin, so we're eventually going to mirror this shape. So I'm going to make my grid fin 5 inches, kind of extend out 5 inches, and then its width I'd like eventually to be maybe 3 inches, so I'm going to do it a width of 1.5 inches right now. That'll give me a nice long grid fin, and maybe that's the way you want your grid fins. again, not an engineer, I just model stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and click enter here. Now before I mirror this and create the other half, I'm going to add a little angled piece here, and this will be really handy for us to reference later on, in addition to making our grid fin look super cool, which is the key to a grid fin, is it's got to look super cool and be made of titanium. I'm pretty sure that's what they're made of now.
Are these out of titanium?
I think the new ones are made of titanium. So the key measurement that we want about this angled piece here is we want it to be at a 45-degree angle. So the length of our line I'm not really concerned about as long as it's 45 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the tab key, and that'll bounce me to the other measurement that is part of a line, part of constraining a line, and I'm just going to type in 45 here. And now if I hover over this this line segment here that's part of my rectangle, I get the little blue X, and then I can click, and now I've placed that line kind of at intersecting with that, place this 45-degree line intersecting with my rectangular line there. Now we can do the job of mirroring things. I will say, you know, just as an added bonus here, this line here that I have highlighted, we don't really need that to be a solid line. We're going to use this as a line to mirror over, and it'll save us some steps later if we go ahead and change that line to a construction line. I suppose this line could also be a center line because we are going to use it as a center line. But a center line keeps things divided, so I'm going to go ahead and make mine a construction line, and we'll see it'll save us some clicking later if we have this be a construction line here. So now I'm going to come up to my mirror command. So I'll come up to create, and then I'll come down to this mirror option, and I'll choose the objects that I want to mirror. So the objects that I want to mirror are all of my lines except for my construction line. So I don't need to mirror that construction line. That construction line is going to be our mirror line. It's going to be the line that we mirror things over. So now that I've got all my objects selected, I can also choose the line that I'm mirroring things over, and then say oakley dokley. Alright, so now I am going to, well, let's make our pattern on this as well. So kind of debating in my head on whether I wanted to have us draw our grid fin pattern on this same sketch. So this pattern that we're going to make here, whether I want to have that on the same sketch. Sometimes it's nice to break up, like if you're going to have a sketch that's just got a whole bunch of geometry on it, it's nice to break that up sometimes, but I don't know if we need to do that in this case. So let's draw that in the same, on the same sketch. Before I make my pattern, I think I would like to define the outer edges, the kind of the frame of this grid fin. So I'll come up to my modify menu here, and I'll scroll down to offset. I'll scroll down to offset here, and now I'm going to choose the lines that I'm going to offset here. And we'll have to do this in two separate batches, unfortunately, because it doesn't want to, actually I wonder if I uncheck this chain selection, if it'll let me. Nope, it doesn't want to let me. I'd really want to include these 45-degree lines in my offset lines here, but it doesn't want to let me do that all at the same time, so I'll have to do that in a separate offset, and I'm going to do a -1/8 of an inch here as my offset amount. That'll give me a decently thick-ish grid fin, relatively speaking. I had to do a -1/8 of an inch here because I want my offset to be inside as opposed to outside. So for me, if I did a positive number, that would end up outside of my original box, and I want that to be inside my original box here. And now that I've got that offset done, I can do my second offset. So I'll grab my offset tool one more time by clicking on Modify and then Offset. And now it'll let me specify, well, it's really going to be a pain in the butt. It's going to make me do 3 separate offsets here. One for each line. So I'll offset my first 45-degree line in, and for some reason now when I go inwards it's a positive 1/8 of an inch. And I'll do that again on the other side, so I'll click on Modify and then Offset, and then I'll specify my last 45-degree line here. And see, now this one wants to be a negative number to go inwards. Negative numbers and positive numbers always confuse me in Fusion, so you just gotta kind of try one, and then if that doesn't look like what you were going for, switch that negative sign to a positive sign. You gotta turn that negative upside down. Yeah. Okay, cool.
As it like turn the frown up.
Right, yeah, that's what I was going for. Alright, good, alright. Bad jokes are part of class. You have to suffer through them because it's free. Alright, so now we've got the kind of the outline made here. Now we want to make the actual physical pattern. Are you guys following me so far?
So far.
Beautiful. Alright, so now the meat here, patterning. The pattern tools are super useful. And there are patterns that you can make in 3-dimensional space and in 2-dimensional space, if that makes sense. So we're going to start by making a pattern here in 2-dimensional space of sketches. But first we need to have what we're making a pattern of. And for us it's going to be a small little diamond-shaped box. It's kind of like the cutout of the grid fin, you could say. So I'm going to come up to my rectangle tool and choose a rectangular tool that I don't use very much, the 3-point rectangle. So a 3-point rectangle will allow us to make a rectangle that's at an off angle from our grid. So the way that this tool works is it wants me to place the first corner of my rectangle, and I'm going to place that right on this construction line here. And I've clicked once, and now I'm moving my mouse out. And if I move my mouse out at the right angle, at the correct angle, let's say, you can see I'm getting a little constraint that's popping up here. So if I move it off at roughly the same angle as my 45-degree line, it's giving me this parallel constraint. And that's what I want. And you know, if you're not getting this, that's okay, because I'll show you how to add that later. In fact, I'll purposefully do it wrong here. So I'm going to specify a length of 0.5 inches. And now after you specify a length, you have to click in order to place that length. So I've got my length and both, it's kind of the length and the angle that I'm doing this at the same time here. And once I click the first time, it lets me place the second measurement of this. So I'm going to do another 0.5 inches, and then I'm going to hit enter, because now I'm done making that offset or 3-point rectangle. Now part of the reason, or maybe the main reason, other than looking cool.
Carl?
Yeah.
How can you establish your 40-year angle there, or doesn't it matter?
We're gonna do that right now. So
okay,
so
that doesn't matter then, right?
Yeah, so the next thing we're gonna do here is kind of make this at the correct angle.
I just blew up.
Oh yeah? Should I take a pause?
It disappeared.
Uh-oh. Like your sketch disappeared?
My rectangle disappeared.
Oh. Yeah, try making it one more time.
Okay, got it.
Okay, cool. All right, so once we've got our rectangle here, we can make it the right angle, so, or the correct angle, let's say. And I'm going to do that by adding a parallel constraint. So if I come up to these constraints menu here, and I choose this parallel option, you can see that my rectangle, or not my rectangle, my square is currently blue. All the lines that make it up are blue, and that's because it's not fully constrained. It's not like locked in position and space. And we're going to start doing that now. So in order to use my parallel constraint here, I'm going to click on the line, one of the lines that I want to, or both of the lines that I want to make parallel. So I'm going to click on one of the lines that represents my square here, and then one of my 45-degree lines that I want it to be parallel to. And you can see it kind of snaps into position there. Now, it's still blue, and that's because it's not constrained in space, and I'd like us to constrain this in space as well. So I'm going to come over and add another constraint here, which is a dimension constraint. I think about the dimension tool as a way of adding a constraint. It's not, however, in the constraints menu. It's in the create menu. And I can come down to this sketch dimension option here. And now the way we use our sketch dimension option or tool here is we specify two things and then give it a distance between it. So I'll zoom in here so we can see this a little better. So I'm going to specify the corner of my little cube here, and then I'm going to specify the side of my offset wall. And once I've clicked individually on those two things, I can move my mouse to the right or to the top or to the bottom, and now I've got this dimension that I can place here. For me it's 0.207, for you it'll be different, but regardless, we'll place that dimension, and now it highlights that number, and I can specify the dimension that I really want it to be, which is 0.125, let's say.
That totally screwed up my rectangle.
Ah, interesting. Is your rectangle, what color are the lines that make your rectangle?
One of them is blue.
One of them is blue. Which is the blue line? Just out of curiosity.
The top right.
So like that one?
Oh no, not that rectangle. The box that we made. That
Ah, really? One of them is blue and the other ones are black?
one of them turned blue.
Interesting.
Let's see if I...
Does your box have a height and width? Does it have two dimensions that make up its size, like mine says 0.5 by 0.5?
Huh, it doesn't seem to.
So you can add, if a dimension is missing, like you've got that dimension missing there, you can add that the same way we just added that dimension, spacing out our box in space. So if I come down here to the sketch dimension tool, I could click on this line segment, this one that's not defined here, and then I can move my mouse out, and I could place that dimension, and then I could give it that like kind of 0.5 inches. So my guess is once you do that, it will snap into position and be where it wants to live. Fingers crossed.
Let's see.
It's good when Fusion behaves.
I use dimensional over constrain the sketch.
Ah, interesting. I'm going to come and peek over your shoulder.
Well, this...
Oh yeah, those are all black.
Okay, now it wasn't literally 2 minutes ago.
Alright, right on. Fusion fears me. That was good, Mike. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, is it okay if it's not on the center line like
So
yours
I
is?
would make it on the center line there.
Okay.
And, you know, if you wanted to make it on the center line, there is a constraint that you could add that would make it go down to that center line there. So,
Alright, I'm listening.
if I make a square over here, and let me make it parallel just to kind of show you guys, and I suppose it really needs to be properly dimensioned. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. And okay, so if you happen to have your square off here, and we want it to be on our center line here, right? Now, it's kind of locked in angle because I've got this parallel constraint going on, right? So it's not going to change its angle. We just want to move its position down here. And there is a constraint called the coincident constraint here. So if I choose this coincident constraint, and then I can pick one of these corners here, so my far right or my far left corner of this little diamond shape, and then I can pick the line here. So this line, this construction line, and then it will snap right into place like that.
It just said, eat shit and bark at the moon.
Oh, well, maybe I'll come and peek.
Very specific.
Failed to solve. Please try revising dimensions or constraints.
I wonder if it's constrained already at that little pivot point there. But you know, we'll roll with it in the area you've got it, Mike. That'll be
Well,
okay. Or the other option would be to like.
let's, I can step back. Okay, undo the dimension. Undo, okay, the parallel is undone.
Try moving it. If you
Yes.
grab your move tool.
Yes, okay. First I picked up my thingy, I selected that area.
Okay.
Then I go to move object.
And you just pick any one of the lines that make up that. There you go. And try moving it up or down. We'll let you move it right or left. So it'll let you move it right or left. So that tells me that it's already kind of constrained on that line. So my guess is the first.
Go back and kill it and redraw it.
Yeah.
Okay,
There. So my guess is the first line, or the first point you made of your line here, not your line, your square. So if I go back in time and kind of be where you're at, the first line you made was on that construction line. But instead of going down, like below it, like we did, you kind of went up here. So it was kind of already constrained to that line, and it wouldn't let you move. So the problem we just had with somebody here in person, live in Model Monday here at the Milwaukee Makerspace, was we had this issue where we've got nope, go the right way. Alright. We've got a box that's the right size. Only we couldn't constrain this point to this line because it was already constrained. So this point was already constrained to this line. And somewhere that constraint lives as one of these little icons. It's just can be a difficult thing to figure out which icon it is. So and we determine that by, if I grab my move tool, I could move this line right or left, but it would not let me move it up or down. So this line doesn't want to move up or down because it's already constrained here. And for me, I can see that there's this little constraint icon here. This happens to be a coincident constraint icon. So if you can find that, you can delete it. And now, in theory, now it'll let me move it up or down. But sometimes your drawing is full of these little constraint icons. Like, this is a symmetry constraint, but exactly what this constraint is holding symmetry for is kind of a mystery. It doesn't really tell us. So finding the right constraint can be a pain in the butt. Alright, so, little tangent, but that's okay. I appreciate that. Are you good, Mike?
No.
Not yet? Can we give you a minute?
Yes,
Cool.
please.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so our next step here, we're just giving somebody here in person a minute, make sure nobody else joined us, is to make a pattern of this. So if you want to, you can kind of jump ahead and explore this rectangular pattern tool, which is the tool we're going to be using next to make a pattern of our grid fin here.
Got it.
All right, cool. So now the next step, like I said, is to come up to the Create menu and choose Rectangular Pattern. Rectangular patterns are kind of my go-to if somebody says, hey, I want to copy and paste a thing. You know, I often encourage them to think about maybe that's a pattern, but just a pattern of one. Copy and paste isn't as powerful as a pattern tool, but there's similarities for sure. So the first thing we want to do is we want to click on the object that we want to make a pattern of. So that object that we want to make a pattern of is our little square that we just made and set to the appropriate angle. So I'm going to click on all 4 line segments that make up that square. So I'll select all 4 of my line segments, and now it wants to default to making this pattern kind of in this direction, right? But we actually don't want to do that. We want to make a pattern that is in the direction, kind of in a 45-degree angle. And we can do that by choosing the directions that this is making a pattern of here in my pattern window. And I'm going to go ahead and click on one of my 45-degree lines. It doesn't matter. I can either click on one of these up here or one of these down here. It can be an offset line. It doesn't really matter. And now my whole pattern rotates to 45 degrees like that. The default usually in the pattern tool is, yeah, go ahead.
When I went to set my diamond at 1/8 of an inch from the offset line, it left the diamond where it was and it moved the offset line over.
That is totally okay.
All right?
Yeah. It sometimes the things that move depend on how other things are constrained, but if the shape didn't get all funky, then you're good to go. Yeah. All right, cool. So the default in this distance or in this rectangular pattern window is usually set to extent. And what that means is this pattern is going to take place, this quantity of 3 is going to take place over the distance of an inch, 1.2 inches. And it's right now it's just changing the total distance that it's making that pattern within. I find it more beneficial, instead of having an extent in most cases, to choose the spacing that you want to have between patterns. So the spacing that we're going to have, if I want to leave 1/8 of an inch gap in my half-inch square pattern here, the spacing that we're going to want is 1/2 inch plus 1/8, so it's going to be 0.625. And I'm going to make that same distance measurement for the other direction here. So we've got two directions that we're making our pattern in, kind of like an X and a Y here. And I'll also make that the same amount. And now that we've set that amount, now all we have to do is change the quantity. So if we want to expand this pattern so it fills up our grid fin out here, we just have to up this quantity until it surpasses the edge. So for me, 7 went out past the edge there, and that is, I think, going to be phenomenally adequate. And it goes out beyond our borders, which is what we want here. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. So now we are done making our grid fin sketch. You could do things here to clean this up. So, probably what best practices would be here would be to trim some of these lines that we're not going to need. So we don't really need all these lines out here. Because we just need the grid that appears within our rectangle. So we could delete them. However, I will say that I try not to delete things that are part of a pattern in general, or like things that were mirrored. Unpredictability can happen. So let's say I want to change my grid pattern in some way, shape, or form at a later date. If I've deleted things or trimmed lines, it doesn't always let me predictably change my grid pattern, so I tend to leave things messy like this. But I leave up to you if you want to trim things away or delete these ones that we're not going to need. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and click Finish Sketch. Now I've got a Sketches folder inside of my grid fin component that I can go ahead and name that sketch. So this is my grid. I'm just going to call it grid. Anything is better than sketch 1. And now I'm going to rotate this view so I'm looking at a little bit more of a three-dimensional angle here. And I'm going to go ahead and extrude the shapes that I need to extrude here. So if I come up to my Create menu and choose the Extrude option, now I want to highlight a bunch of stuff. So most of the work here is going to be done for us. So I have to extrude all of that bit right there, right? And then it's going to be kind of a lot of clicking to specify each one of the little parts of my grid fin. And because our pattern extends out beyond the edges of where we want our grid fin, it breaks up our edges. So we kind of have to go through and specify each one of these different shapes. Now this would be the advantage of using that trim tool, or deleting the lines that are kind of superfluous here. Is it would save us some time here when we're choosing which kibbles and bits we need to extrude. But in my, like I said, I try not to delete things that are part of patterns. It's messed me up before. It's bit me in the butt a couple of times, and I just know that I'd rather have to do this than get bitten in the butt when an inevitable change that needs to happen. Alright, so I've got all the bits of my grid fin chosen here, and now I just have to specify a distance. I'm going to make it a full inch. That seems real big. I'm going to make it 3/4 of an inch. Again, not an engineer. I just like to make drawings and show people how to use Fusion. Maybe you guys are engineers and you want to tell me in the comments of this YouTube video what I did wrong. But, you know, I won't read them. Okay, so now...
Okay, Carl?
Yeah.
Before you get too far ahead.
Yeah.
My grid is leaking a little bit of smoke here.
Oh, yeah? Okay, good. All
I
right.
need some help.
All right, let me come and peek.
And my pattern tool ran away.
Uh-oh. Aha. So, your pattern looks different than mine.
Yes, it does.
And so, let's see if we can find that pattern icon. So, if you scroll
It's still-
in there. Let's see, where's our pattern icon?
Because we were in a sketch, and
Yeah, and I think you're still currently in that
I'm
sketch.
still in the sketch.
Yeah, so don't click finish yet.
I'm not.
So what does our pattern icon look like? So if we wanted to change our pattern, which is what somebody wants to do here, is if I scroll in, this is the icon that we're looking for. It's a weird little square thing that I've got highlighted on the screen right there, Mike. That's our pattern, I'm going to call it a pattern constraint. And it'll
This
probably
little thing
be-
right
there you
here?
go. Yeah, double click on that. There we
Okay.
go. All right, cool.
Now,
So
where was mine different?
where you didn't specify a direction. So if you click on that and then choose one of those 45-degree lines, one of those offset 45-degree lines that we made.
Okay, like
That's it.
this?
Exactly. There we go. So now it's making that pattern in the right angles, right? So now we just need to give it the right numbers here. So that distance,
Yeah.
you make that 0.625. So it's 1/8 of an inch bigger than
Okay,
the
on
1/2
both
an
of
inch.
them?
Yeah, both of those. And now if you say, and I think what was the number that I had to make? I feel like 7 was the amount that covered my grid. Yeah, 7 in quantity in each direction covered my grid. And then if you say okay, now in theory you'll have something that looks more like that.
And, okay.
No? Oh yeah, it just went in the other direction. It just went out that way.
So how do I fix
Let's
it?
find that one more time and zoom in. And find that pattern tool. Or that pattern constraint.
That one?
There you go. And now, see that arrow there?
This one?
Yeah, try bringing it the other direction. And now, you can change that spacing. So it wants to be a negative number for some reason for you. So that wants to be a negative.
Negative 0.625.
Negative 0.625.
Nope.
It still wants to go the other direction. Try one more time.
So tight. Okay.
We've got one of them set to symmetric. So that's part of the issue there too, so that should just be one direction.
Okay.
Our arrow doesn't look like they're going the right way, so try typing in that negative 0.625.
Okay.
That's 6 1. There we go. Ah.
Sweet.
Cool.
Okay, and then go and select.
So we just had an issue here in person where somebody's grid, somebody's pattern was going like that direction. It was going not the right way. And this is another like negative and positive number kind of thing. So for me, we both have the exact same sketch. And for me, going positive in both directions worked. However, for somebody here in person, they had to change one of their distances to a negative number in order for it to, extend into the inside of the shape here. So sometimes you just have to mess with those negative and positive numbers until you get it moving in the right direction here. All right, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and click Finish Sketch here. And now the parts that you're going to extrude, Mike, are going to be all of these bits. And let me go back to 0 here. So it's kind of going to be the entire outline, and then everything excluding those little kibbles here. I wonder if this is a good use of a tool. If I uncheck here, there are two ways to make selections in Fusion. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but if we click and drag from top right to bottom left, we can see our tool is orange, right? And we've got a solid line on the outside of our My Selection box here. So if I let go, what that does is it picks only the things that are fully inside of that selection box. I'll do it one more time. So if I click right and do top right to bottom left, it only picks those items that are fully inside of my box. If I do it the other direction, so if I do top left to bottom right, I'm selecting about the same amount here, except I got a dashed line and it's all yellow. And this selection will choose anything that touches the inside of my selection tool. So it's kind of a different way to use that selection tool, and we can kind of take advantage of that in this case. I probably should have thought of this the first time I chose all these items. Is I can click and drag over this whole thing, right? And now I can just unselect, because these are a lot larger areas. It's probably easier to unselect these little kibbles here than it is to come in and click on all these little kibbles and bits on my outside ring there. So options for the selection tool are good. They come in handy. And now I have all of my 39 items selected. Are you with us? Not yet? Still clicking? And then we'll specify a distance, and again it's going to be 0.75 or so inches. And then I'm going to click on OK. Oh, I missed I got one too many things selected here. I don't want to actually have all of this either. There we go. Now I'm going to say OK. And now I'm going to kind of walk around and see how people are doing here in person.
Oh, yeah, you're good.
How? Well, some of the stuff is not selected. Unpick what?
That outside area, that right there.
Oh,
And then you do want that located in there.
but this little area?
Yeah, that little area there.
That will pick.
Try zooming in. There you go. you gotta kind of zoom in or get close to an object, and well, my
Okay.
guess is that's what's happening. Yeah, there you go.
Let's try the same thing here because it wasn't.
There you go.
Yeah, so a slight issue we were having here is with this extrude tool. If I come here and say edit feature, it doesn't, if I'm trying to click on that item, sometimes it won't let me choose something unless I get much closer to it. So if I've got a bunch of things picked there, for me it's doing a pretty good job. But sometimes I have to zoom into an object in order to, for Fusion to allow me to click on it. So, alright. So once we got our all of our bits chosen there for the extrude here, now we just need to, let's go ahead and make a pattern of this, because I'm not sure, we're kind of running low on time here. We got 10 minutes left or so. So the other pattern type that I wanted to show you guys was a circular pattern. So we want to make a pattern of this around a central core, and the way that we do that is with the, actually we're going to need a central core first. So we're done making our grid fin. So I'm going to go ahead and close my grid fin component here. And right now our grid fin is our active component. So if we were to make more components, they would end up inside of our grid fin component. And we don't really want to make more components inside of our grid fin component. I would like to make another component outside of it though. So the way we do that is by making sure we've got our main document as our active component. So I came over to my browser here, and for me it's called unsaved because I have not saved this yet. So you know, you can judge me later for not saving as I go. But I'm going to go ahead and click on unsaved and make that our active component just by clicking on the little radio button next to that component here, or the main document component here in my browser. Now let's create a new component. So I'm going to come up here to create and then come down to new component. And this component is just going to be called tube. The tube, man, major tubage. And I'll click on OK. And now our grid fin component kind of goes transparent. And that's because our tube component is our active component. So when you're switching back and forth between components, it's kind of a visual way to show you what your active component is. So the tube component is our active component. So all the other components are going to kind of show kind of a ghosted out three-dimensional image here. And we can just start making a new sketch here like we did the first time. So we just need to make a very simple circle. So if I come down here to create sketch, I'm going to choose to make the sketch on the top plane. And if you ever are having a hard time, like I really want to click on the top plane, but it's obscured by this other body here, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn off my grid fin component for now. And now that lets me click on the top plane here, and now I can turn my grid fin component back on. And I'm going to go ahead and draw my circle right over off to the side here, and I'm going to make it a 3-inch. 3 inches is plenty for an egg, don't you think? A 3-inch diameter circle. And I'll go ahead and click enter. And now I'm just going to grab my move tool. So if I click on modify and then move. I just want to place this circle closer to my grid fin. You know, we don't have to be super precise about it right now, but we just want to get kind of close to our grid fin here. And then once I've got it close-ish, then I'll go ahead and click OK. And now we're done making this tube sketch here. So now that we've made that tube sketch, I just click Finish Sketch. I've got a sketch here in Sketches folder inside of my tube component that I can go ahead and name. This is my tube. And now we can extrude this shape as well. So we've got this circle here. So I'll come up here to this Create option, and then I'll come down to the Extrude menu. Extrude tool, excuse me. And I'm going to extrude this down, let's say, 7 inches, and for me it's got to be -7 inches. And you know, I kind of want to do this in 2 directions, so I'd like my tube to live a little bit below my grid fin and, you know, a lot below it. So I'm going to do this in 2 directions, and so in my direction here in my extrude window, instead of one side, I'm going to change this to 2 sides. And now I could probably say one of these is going to be, oh boy, I accidentally deleted the wrong, alright, there we go. So one of these is going to be 1 inch, so I'm going to go 1 inch up, and I want to go 7 inches down, and that gives me a cylinder that lives both above our grid fin and below it. And then I'm going to say OK. You guys with me?
You killed my computer.
Oh, I did it die?
It's locked.
Oh.
It's letting me draw, but once I extruded the grid fin, it would not let me rotate or look or move it.
Bummer. Well, so the penultimate thing that we want to do here, so the second to last thing is we want to, well, actually we want to do a couple more things, so we might run a little late. So we wanted to make this tube, and we've got a cylinder, and we can turn our cylinder into a tube using that shell command that we learned last week, right? So in this modify section, if I choose this shell option here, and I just specify the top and give it a distance of like 1/8 of an inch, which in freedom units is a round number somehow. Now this is a cup, right? If we wanted this to be a tube, instead of just having one face selected, you really have to have this be a 0 in order to select multiple faces. But you can select multiple faces and then type in a distance here. Now we got a tube. We actually want this to be more like a cup because I think we want to have a bottom to this. So I'm going to unselect one of those, or the bottom there, and just specify the top. So now we got a nice little cup here, and I'm going to say OK. And now I can go ahead and select my unsaved document as the main component here, and kind of come back out to kind of the top level. So now I have my main document selected as the main document here, and I can make a pattern of this grid fin all the way around my tube. So I'll go ahead and choose that pattern tool one more time. In fact, this time we're not going to make a rectangular pattern, we're going to make a circular pattern. So if I come down here to pattern and then circular pattern, and I specify not a body type, but a type of component. So we're making a pattern of components here. I can pick on my grid fin and then choose the axis that I'm going to revolve around. For in this case, we're just going to pick the outside or the inside of our cylinder here, and it's going to go ahead and make a pattern around that. I'm going to make a pattern of 4 of them. And then say OK. So now we've got our grid fins drawn here. The last thing that I was hoping to get to here, I kind of made an ambitious project for 1 hour, so I apologize. But the last thing that I wanted to make sure we get to here is, last week we drew an egg. Let me find it. So I probably put it somewhere in my Model Monday folder. Maybe let's search. So here we go, egg from class. So this egg is a component, just like all the components we made here. This file, egg from class, that we drew last week, is just like a component, like this tube is a component, or this grid fin here is a component. If I've got my main document, my active component, and I right-click on one of these files over here, I can say Insert into Current Drawing. And that's going to bring this file in. Oh, hey, it won't let me do it until I save this document. So this is our egg drop from class. And put it in the right folder, which is projects, and then my Model Monday folder. Alright, so now that document is saved, so I no longer have unsaved document as the main component. Now it will let me insert into current design. So now I've got this egg that we drew last week that I can place. Kind of look at it top down here, and it's going to go like inside of our little shape here. And it's going to kind of live down in here somewhere, and I'll say OK. Now it's just showing me half of the egg because apparently I turned off the other half before I saved it, but the other half lives, I can assure you. And now we can kind of start to think about how we want to rig up this shape. And I think that's probably what we're going to do next week. That doesn't leave us a whole lot of time to actually make this thing. Are you guys going to participate in the egg drop? Do you have a plan of your own?
Yeah, about as crude as it goes.
Okay, cool.
Popcorn.
Right, okay, popcorn is a good option. So, like maybe, you could fill this cylinder with popcorn and then put our 3D printed egg thing in there, right? And, and go to town like that. But next week, what we're going to actually get to, because this class is about learning stuff. It's not really about, you got your own plan for your egg drop thing. We're going to insert components from Mcmaster Car. So we're going to kind of start with that next week. Mcmaster Car is a great website. This is not an advertisement for Mcmaster Car, but I order stuff from them at work all the time. And almost all of the things that you can find at Mcmaster Car, like this compression spring here. Let's find a decent length one and a decent inner diameter. Like that's probably fine. Just to show a product detail, like this spring, we'll be able to insert this spring. Hopefully I didn't speak too soon. Add to order. Oh boy, this spring does not have a CAD drawing. Please log in and reload the page to download CAD. Alright, so something messed up here. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it next time. And we'll insert a spring from Mcmaster Car, and then we'll draw a sketch around it in order to hold that spring. So that's what we'll be doing next week. We either do this online, so I send out a link via email, or you can come join us here in person at the Milwaukee Makerspace. And until next week, we'll have fun drawing stuff.
Okay. Good job, Carl. Can you come here?
I sure can, yeah.